Okay, so in the beginning we said we needed 5 pieces to the pattern, and we have 5. We've got the sleeve, the neckband note, the front and 2 pieces, and the back piece. That makes 5 total. Now I just need to cut out these pattern pieces and lay them on top of fabric, making sure to note the grain and the stretch and where the fold is placed. And I can cut material and work on figuring out the construction. So that's what this video is going to be about. We're going to inspect the garment and figure out what order to put these pieces together. So let's talk about the order of constructing this garment after you've cut out your pattern pieces. If you've followed patterns before, you can actually refer to the instructions on any of the shirts that you've made, and you may notice that there is a consistency in order of how you construct the garment together. So you can use that as a guideline, but you can also determine order of construction by examining the article of clothing that you're trying to recreate. So one of the first things that you need to keep in mind is once a seam has been made, it's really hard to go back and create hems if that hem has been tucked into the seam. And by that I mean this side seam here where that front nursing panel is attached to the rest of the shirt. It's hemmed, but that hemmed piece goes straight into the side. It's almost like it disappears. And that's because that inner seam that connects the sides of the shirt together, if you feel where that hem goes in, it's slightly thicker because there's that extra layer of that hem that's been tucked in. So that means you need to hem that front panel before you do anything else in case you forget, right? So you're gonna hem that. That's step 1. Step 2 is going to involve putting the shirt together. So you need to look at the pieces that are put together and figure out where it might be. Most other patterns will have you connect the shoulder seams, so that's where I would go. But now that I'm noticing that's where I would go, this access panel for nursing, remember that raw edge is covered in the double fold binding. Well, that binding goes all the way to the top, and it goes into that serge seam. So that means step 2 is actually going to be finishing the binding of this nursing access hole. I use a double fold bias binder attachment on my cover stitch machine to do this, but you could, with a really good iron and lots of steam, create the double fold binder for that raw edge out of knit fabric. Basically, the reason for this is that you don't want that raw edge to become super stretchy, overstretched. Depending on the material you use it from, the recovery of that fabric might not be so great, and that hole might actually become bigger over time. But finishing it off protects it from becoming overstretched that way. You could use a single fold binder. You could probably even serge it and call it good, but this is the double fold binder. So step 2 is bind the raw edge of that nursing inside layer of your t-shirt. Then step 3 would be to attach all the pieces together. This comes before the sleeve because the sleeve is one whole piece that requires the front and back to be put together. It also comes before the neck binding because there is no neck until the shoulders are put together. And it comes before the sides because the sleeves have to be attached before the sides are done. So step 3 is creating that shoulder seam. Step 4 would be to attach the sleeve. And to do that, you need to make sure that you have your sleeve piece folded in half, mark the halfway point and line it up with the seam of the shoulder and attach the sleeve to it. You do the other side and you have constructed everything except the neckband and the sides. At this point, you could go either way. You could do the neckband first or you could do the side seam first. I just like to finish the bodice while I have it ready to go, so I'm going to say that the next step is to do that side seam. And when you do a side seam, you've already attached the sleeve all the way around, so you just line up the raw edge of the seam of the ends of the shirt. This is the armpit, and you stitch all the way down, or you serge all the way down, making sure to tuck in that inside layer as you connect the front and back together, and catching that shorter layer on the outside all the way down. And then you work on the neck binding. There are a lot of great tutorials out there on how to do a neck binding or a neck band attachment that's a V-neck. It's not my favorite just because it takes some extra steps and time, but it is a really lovely finish. So you can just Google that, and there's plenty of videos that walk you through how to do that. And once that is done, all you have left is to hem the shirt and hem the sleeves. And you can choose a zigzag stitch, a cover stitch. The sleeves you probably don't need to press, but because the bodice and the shirt is curved like that, you may want to have a really hot iron ready and press the hem, fold it under 1/2 inch, press it nicely to keep that fold in place and tuck in all those curve points that want to go straight, and then go back and finish that hem with your choice of machine. And at that point, you would be done. Oh, if you wanted to cover that seam in the back the same way that the retail ready-to-wear shirt is, the way they did this looks like they attached a piece of material to the back when they went to serge the neckband to the back of the shirt that like flipped up, and then they folded it down and top stitched it. That's probably one of the more common ways to do it. You don't have to. I don't plan on doing it myself because I'm not trying to sell these. I'm just wearing them for my own pleasure, and I don't really care if that raw seam is visible or not. And if you're concerned about it flipping up, just give it a really good press, or you could add some decorative top stitching along the neckband if that's what you wanted to do, or you can change it to a scoop neck and do double fold binding around. If you did that, that would change the order of construction, but at this point you can kind of play around with how you want to create it. Now, I can almost guarantee that your first attempt when you make your muslin, a muslin is your trial. You typically do it with fabric that's similar as the fabric you want to make your garment out of, but you also want to account for the fact that there's probably going to be mistakes and errors and adjustments that you're going to make. One of the more common ones that you may finish your muslin and say, I want to change this, may have to do with the sleeves. Sometimes the sleeves end up being not fitted enough, or that armhole is too wide. When you go back to make adjustments to that sleeve, here's an example. You have to keep in mind what this sleeve looks like when you go to attach it. This is the top of the shoulder. So if I'm staring at someone standing on their side, that's what I'm looking at. This is the top of the shoulder, this is the back or the front. In this particular shirt, we didn't account for any ease that goes more towards the front or the back. A lot of professional patterns do tweak the curve and the cap a little bit towards the front or towards the back to accommodate that. Given the nature of this shirt and how not tight fitting it is and how comfortable and loose it is for the most part, I didn't really take that into consideration, but you could if you wanted to, and there's plenty of tutorials that others have created on how to do that. But in terms of adjusting fit for the sleeve, if you find that the armhole, so this hole where your arm comes out, is too wide, then what you're going to want to do is bring this in a little bit at more of an angle, because this is where your arm is coming out. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. So if it's too wide of a sleeve, then you can cut it out. If you decide, hey, I want a flutter sleeve with this, then you don't need as tight of a cap. You can probably do more of a gradient, or you can create a box t-shirt and forget the cap altogether and just go out to the side at a wider angle. There's many adjustments that you can make, but you won't know what kind of changes you want to make until you actually create your muslin. And from there, it's just a matter of back tracing. Okay, what piece is this? Where is that on the pattern? Okay, what if I took it in a little bit more this way or that way? And you can make the adjustments that you want. It could also be that when you go to construct it, you may have some extra, fabric from your sleeve hanging over. That's okay, because you can always cut the sleeve smaller as you put the material pieces together, the fabric pieces together. But if it's too short, that's going to be a problem, because you can only stretch it so far. You shouldn't have to stretch anything really in terms of the shoulder and the sleeve when you put it together. The neckband is probably the only place you're going to actually stretch something, but everything else, ease has been built in, so stretch shouldn't be needed. So it's almost always better to have the sleeve be a little bit too big and then cut it in. And unless there's something drastically wrong with the cap, it shouldn't change the way the shirt looks all too much.